The mic's on? Yes. Okay, good. I call to order this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Thursday, May 8th, 2023. Present are from the commission, Kathy Green, Angela Dye, Todd Brown, and Peter Sante, and on Zoom, Lisha Bettman and Charles Dalton, and myself, Alani Constantine. From staff, we have Phil, Kevin, Piper, Donna, sorry, who's hiding behind Phil.
Yeah.
And that's it. Okay. All right. Our first item is approval of the minutes of, thank you, Kathy.
I move to approve the minutes of April 27th, 2023 as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you, Angela. All in favor, raise your hand. All right, the minutes are approved. Are there any staff announcements?
We do have a couple staff announcements. So Ron was unable to attend the meeting this evening. So work session item number 3, the item about Telluride question 300 is going to be continued. We're hoping that we could perhaps do a special meeting the week of June 5th, the first week in June. Do you think that's possible? How does everyone's calendar look for June 5th through 9th?
Have to be at home to look at it, see.
Well, I think, let's see, do we have a quorum? 1, 2, 3,
Yeah, we have a full board.
5, 6. All right, we have.
So that would be the 8th?
We can do it pretty much any day of that week of June. I think it'll just be for the one work session item.
7th and 8th work for me, the 6th would not.
Well, why don't we stick to Thursday if that works? Let's look and see if Thursday works for everybody. And if not, yeah, and if not, we can work on an alternative.
Okay, so then when you get to work session item 3, you can either continue it to the date certain that Thursday or just continue it and then set the date at a later time. However you want to handle that.
I'll just say continue to a later date since we're not 100% sure.
Okay, then if everyone just wants to let me know tomorrow if June 8th works, that would be great.
That's
Can we say probably June
opening
8th or
of
is
the
that
museum.
I think it's better to be
Likely.
updated for the record and we can just
Okay,
among ourselves know that we're aiming for June 8th.
do you think a different day would be better?
Probably not.
Okay. That is the only announcement I have.
Thank you, Phil. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Piper?
We don't have any hands raised. We've only got one member of public online.
Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to our public hearing items. Our first public hearing item is the law offices of Ethan A. Miller, home occupation use permitted on review. This is consideration of the plan by the Planning and Zoning Commission of a use permitted on review to allow a home occupation pursuant to Land Use Code Article 6, Division 1. The legal description is lot 33, block 5, West Telluride addition to the town. According to the plat recorded June 20th, 1891, in Plat Book 28, page 7, County of San Miguel, State of Colorado. Address 430 West Colorado Avenue, Zone District Historic Residential. The owner and the applicant are Ethan Miller, and the staff member is Phil. Phil.
Great, thank you very much. This is a presentation on a home occupation as a use permitted on review. You can see this map here showing the subject property near the intersection of West Colorado and South Aspen Street. These building footprints were mapped, I think, a little over 10 years ago, so it does not actually show the existing conditions of the house with the large addition that was done several years ago. The subject property is in the historic residential zone district. Just some background info. Subject property is not in a geologic hazard area or a designated wetland. The single family home on site is rated as supporting. So this is information provided by the applicant in the required narrative. The proposed home occupation use would be for the law offices of Ethan A. Miller. He states he has no employees and is staffed only by himself. He does not anticipate any regular visits by clients or guests. And a law office is an allowed home occupation use under section 6-106B1 for professional offices. So home occupations can be allowed as use permitted on review if it meets section 6104 and 6106. It does not constitute a vested property right, and it needs to meet the definition of home occupation seen here. It's important to note that based on the description from the narrative, at this time, it doesn't really meet the definition of a home occupation. But if he does want to apply for a signed permit, he needs to have an approved home occupation. And a business identification sign on a residence then sort of qualifies to use as a home occupation. So that's kind of an odd loophole. What came first, the sign of the home occupation?
Chicken or egg?
Exactly. So you can see these review standards here used for all uses permitted on review. Here are 4 additional review standards. Staff does not have concerns about this. The proposed use really can meet all 6104A through H. Then you can see review standards used specifically for home occupations. The applicant is not proposing any sales of goods or retail uses. He's not proposing any exterior storage. He does have an active business license, which is required. And the proposed home occupation would clearly be a secondary use to the use as a residence. I did want to point out 2 specific criteria. 6106G states the home occupation shall not occupy more than 25% of the total floor area of the structures or 500 square feet, whichever is less. The proposed area is well below the 25%, but it does seem to be a little over the 500 square feet. Staff does not have concern about this. He's not proposing improvements to the historic structure. It exists and it can accommodate the use. And then 6106H, a home occupation may be allowed no more than 1 freestanding or wall sign, not to exceed 2 square feet, which he can only apply for if he has an approved home occupation. So staff is recommending approval. It does meet all standards in 6104 and 6106, except the size of the home occupation, and we are recommending approval. You can see the conditions seen here. These have not changed. These are the same ones in your staff report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Does anybody have questions for Phil?
So-
Kathy?
Other than if he wants a sign, the reason he would not need this home occupation license is because he's not going to have clients or regular visitors to the business.
Correct. If you look at the definition of, and it's kind of an oddly worded definition of home occupation. It says at the bottom here, it says an individual working at home that does not routinely conduct meetings, does not have routine contact with employer, employee, consultant, or client, and does not conduct traditional sales, does not place an identifying sign, should not be considered a home occupation. So
Negative.
yes,
Right.
So there are a lot of remote workers who it's not.
all of them are working without a sign, which is sort of the dividing line here.
Other questions for?
How often do you guys review these?
Every 10 years.
I believe
Rarely.
there was 2 in recent history. Last one was for Kathy Green, and the one before that was a few years before that. Average every 4 years, I would say.
Other questions for Phil? I can't see Lee Shea or Charles, so let me know if you want to ask questions.
Is this in perpetuity or is this does this have to get renewed just so I'm?
As long as it's not a change in use or the land use code is not changed to sort of dictate changes to this, it sort of runs until he discontinues the use or sells the property. Or if we start receiving a ton of complaints, then we can notice it for a hearing and then we can revoke it in a public hearing.
Other questions for Phil? No? All right, let's hear from the applicant.
Good afternoon, folks. So let me just first address the 500 square feet, right? It's really super significant, but I was not aware of that. I just took my existing historic structure and it's all connected is when we get urban model. And I just said, that's my home office because it's connected, but it's sort of a separate area. That's the front room that you first walked into. And it's got a bathroom and a wet bar. I'm super happy to just draw a line down. There's probably a hallway, in fact, that could be considered not part of the home office if we needed to get below the 500 square feet, but it's all sort of, I mean, it's kind of unique because the front structure is sort of a standalone structure, but it is all connected by this hallway to the rest of the house, to the new part of the house. So it's convenient and appropriate, I think, for sort of a standalone home office, but I thought I'd done the calculations at 500 square feet, but a little bit more than that. I was looking, I guess, at the 25%. And it's certainly well below the 25%. With respect to what the town has done historically, you know, no good deed goes unpunished, I guess. That's probably not the right way to say that, but there's so many people in town, we all know this, that effectively have home offices, which is why you never, I guess you never, you know, unless there's a complaint or something, you never see these issues. I likely will put a sign up. I haven't completely decided that yet, but it's got good foot traffic. It is only half a block from the commercial core. So it's not, I mean, this is not a bucolic, it's not Galena or Columbia. It's not a quiet neighborhood to begin with. So it seems to be, it's conducive to this precise type of application. And frankly, the very first criteria, or the very first example of permitted uses in the regs is our professional offices. Other permitted uses include music instrument instruction. If we want to talk about impacts to the community, impacts to the neighborhood, I'm all for music. I'm a music lover to some extent. But I can imagine if it's instruction, you're talking about elementary school students and whatnot, who may not be able to carry that's anyhow. So the point being, the only
Interesting
impact.
Scenario.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of child prodigies that emit wonderful music, but there is no impact. I mean, and I'm not an ambulance chaser type attorney that has a garage sign, which would not be permitted regardless, but I don't bring people off the street. I don't bring clients off the street. That's not my business model, never has been. I would be shocked if I had anyone that was not, and most of my clientele are friends and relationships who are in my house on social reasons and whatnot anyhow, but I would be shocked if I had someone ever really drive up, park in front of my house, displace someone else's parking on the street, and come into my house with the specific purpose of me interviewing them and whatnot. That's just not what I do. And so with respect to the noise, the only noise would be my keystrokes on my computer, and I have a fairly soft keyboard, so I don't think that would be an issue. I obviously do have 3 permitted parking places on the site in the alley. So if there ever was any issue with respect to that, which again, there will not be, it's very parked at on my lawn. So there would be no impact to the street any. I think this is probably one of the least impactful development applications you'll ever see. It's not really even a development application. I mean, I suppose it is. I'm asking for the home occupation. Yeah, I mean, I just, you know, if it would be hard to fathom a home occupation more suited, conducive to the regs. If this didn't fit the regulations, it's hard to imagine one that would, given the location, given the proposed use, and whatnot. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Miller?
I'll make a motion.
No,
Good.
I
Wait,
want to say something
ahead.
that's not a question.
okay.
Um,
Wait. If you're, we'll hold it for discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to do this.
Is there any public comment? No. All right. Now we will turn to discussion. Kathy.
These 2 blocks, the 400 and 500 blocks of West Colorado have, in the time I've lived here, been considered heavily impacted by the traffic coming in and out of town. And when I came here, there were quite a few home occupation uses. I'm not sure that they were licensed. I'm not sure if we even, I don't know when we've started doing the home occupation approval thing, but there were a lot of signs. There was a lot of stuff, especially in the 400 blocks. So I think it's most appropriate as kind of an offset to the impacts of all the traffic, both foot, bike, and especially vehicle traffic, that people in these blocks be allowed to do appropriate home occupations. And I believe this house has had a art gallery in it. And before that, it had another kind of retail use. So this house has usually had, and it's usually been this historic front part of the house that carried the use. This has been a home occupation more often than not in my mere 43 years here.
Other people. Oh,
I'd just add, I think that sounds familiar gallery wise, but the fact that that historic building is on, literally physically on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Speaks to the commercial typical kind of immediacy, seems appropriate.
Other comments? Angela, you had a motion?
Sure. I move to approve a use permitted for on review of application to allow home occupation in the historic residential zone district at 430 West Colorado Avenue, with the findings set forth in the staff report of record dated May 2nd, 2023, with following conditions 1 through 4 as written in the staff report here. This motion is based on evidence and testimony provided at a public hearing held May 18th, 2023, with notice of such hearing provided as required by the Telluride Land Use Code.
Second by Todd.
Thank you, Todd. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand.
Okay.
All right, the motion carries and the use will be permitted. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Bill.
Okay.
All right.
You don't get to vote.
May I remove and return the sign?
Yes, you can. You have to return it.
Thank you. All right, so.
And your attorney sign must have a pointing finger.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you might be the
That one
first
of these
person bringing
guys?
back
Yeah.
our recyclable signs or reusable.
He's the
signs.
first one to get one, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so you'll be the
Yeah.
first one to bring it back, a great precedent.
good start.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, we next have a work session. Our first work session item is the 2023 Commercial Vitality and Commercial Inventory. This is an update on commercial businesses, commercial vitality within commercial core. Our staff member is Phil.
Okay. So you guys, I think generally get yearly updates on commercial business activity and how we're doing with service commissions and things like that. This will be my first time giving the update. So as I'm sure everyone here is aware, there is a vitality setback between Aspen Street and Alder Street, which is known as the commercial core. The vitality setback is to preserve the historic character of Telluride's Main Street as a retail corridor, certain non-retail commercial uses that would otherwise be permitted uses by right in the historic commercial zone district are restricted in this area. One specific way service commercial uses are restricted is the land use code dictates a specific amount of lineal feet for this type of use for commercial storefronts. So when I did the commercial inventory end of March, there was a lot of business change, a lot of moving
Yeah.
around.
There always is off-season musical chairs. Yeah.
This year was.
Correct.
Yeah.
So obviously you see the list of changes that were noted. In general, percentages of specific uses and lineal feet for specific uses did not change that much, with a few specific changes. It might be kind of small for you guys to see this, but major changes that we noticed for the 2023 inventory include 36 additional lineal feet for cultural uses related to the new Telluride art space. And then 42 additional lineal feet for service commercial uses with the completion of the Chase Bank. Those were the two big things I noticed. Other than that, it seemed pretty standard year over year. We've been now tracking this for quite a long time. And other than that, there's not a ton of change to discuss. So if you guys have any questions, certainly let me know.
Yes, well, I have one question. then.
You have a random one.
Can you tell us about the vacancy rate now versus in the past?
Well, there are the vacancy rate.
Or as a percentage, whatever, however. you
I mean,
consider
it looks like currently we have 119 feet of vacant storefront. That is down 3 from the year before. We had 122 last year compared to 163 in 2021. So lower than last year by just 3 feet.
Thank you, Peter.
What's going in the former Telluride Sports on Main Street? I thought the paper's up. I'm just
I
curious
think
what on
it's
the subject.
It is gonna be Telluride Sports.
Gonna be another
New ownership, but still Telluride Sports.
Roger.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was
same name.
Christie Sports.
Well, Christie Sports is.
Right, I don't know. We have not received like a sign application or anything. I think it's just gonna be a Telluride Sports.
So questions might be kind of self-serving, whatever. I know on the cross streets for my offices nearby, it's in the commercial sort of Main Street, half of each of those blocks. I don't front Colorado. I'm on a side street. I think I have the same vitality setback.
Mhm.
I don't, does that sounds right? It's in that.
I don't think you do.
No, I don't.
Maybe
Why
do
it's on
not.
Main Street.
It's
Okay.
only for properties abutting Colorado Avenue.
But isn't it,
Yeah.
isn't there a requirement like on Pacific Street, you can't do residential at the ground level, really?
I believe there is that requirement in the commercial zone district, but I would
he's-
have to look at the.
He's
land use
in the
code.
commercial zone district, he's below the alley.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm a
above
tail.
the-
I'm across 3 old lots that
Mhm.
are all on the alley, but it's not.
Yeah, I don't think you have that requirement.
He's right above.
There's just side questions, curiosity. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm wondering if in that, if these other side streets, whether it's AHA or if these are contemplated in this, or if it's really just the Main Street fronting.
I'm happy to pull up the actual.
I can respond a little bit too.
Kevin,
Can you hear me on the microphone?
Yes.
So trying to remember, just break it out. Colorado Avenue, the focus was businesses fronting Colorado Avenue between those cross streets of Alder up to.
Aspen.
And the concern there was some of the non-retail uses that we were seeing in that area. It didn't mean that they were prohibited. It just meant that there was going to be a cap or a maximum that couldn't be exceeded. What I think you're thinking about, Mr. Sante, is there are certain other areas, maybe this was Kathy's comment as well. They're in the commercial zone or the historic commercial zone, and they have limits on what can be done on the floor level there, but that doesn't differentiate at that level, as long as you're off Colorado Avenue frontage, from a number of those commercial uses that are permitted, like a professional office. You just can't have the residential directly at ground level on some of
That's
those
where I
other
was-
streets.
Okay,
Yeah, that's how I always think about it. Colorado Avenue, that's where you get the limit. And I don't think we've ever exceeded the limit. We've come close.
Yeah.
Couple of years, maybe about 8-10 years ago, I think it was some.
Yeah. we were getting there. Todd, did you have a comment?
It was essentially the same, but this all started. Well, it's come into focus a couple of times, but
Yeah.
what Kevin referred to as 8 or 10 years ago, it's about 10. There was a concern that will be nothing but realty offices.
Right.
And nobody would have anything else to do. And the inventory that Phil went through was started, and it's been amazingly consistent.
Oh.
And yeah, who's in there is a complete revolving door, but the percentages have stayed very, very consistent.
Phil, do you have any update on the currently vacant storefronts? We know one of them, Peter asked, it's actually not vacant, Telluride Sports, they're revising it. Do we know what's happening at all to the others?
I don't really, I'm also not that plugged in.
Yeah,
You know, I
okay,
don't hear the rumors that I'm sure a lot of you guys hear,
Come on.
but no, I don't.
okay,
Yeah.
Kathy.
I just wanted to point out to Peter, we've only been tracking Colorado Avenue vacancies and types of uses if we feel like we need to worry about Pacific Street or whatever, but if you look back, the first year we have data from, we're exactly 100 feet less of the office and professional service. And what we want is things that are interactive for our tourists. I mean, the tourists do love looking at $1 million houses and little windows, but they really prefer t-shirts and, you know, bars and restaurants and real retail and stuff. So, and we also want to support our cultural and government needs as well. So that's what we're doing. And I'm glad Kevin's here. Can we think in the future about having vacancy requirements? I mean, we don't have a huge issue, but to me, it's very sad that the bistro has been sitting there closed for like 3 years. And, you know, if that whoever is leasing it or owns it, that's their choice. We can't do anything, but I believe some communities do have incentives or sticks or, you know, to make things stay open or stay occupied.
I mean, we also had this problem, let me just follow up and then Kevin can answer. We also had this problem with the Peterson building where it was that ground floor, that required commercial space was vacant for a long, long time. And the Chase Bank took its sweet time moving in. So, you know, finally, supposedly it's there.
That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it did make me think at that time, you know, here we have a space which is required to be commercial, but if it's not required to be rented at all, what's the incentive for homeowner, the HOA or the condo above to make that space actually commercial space? And we may be running into that type of problem.
Yeah, I think to Kathy's question, I'm not aware actually of a jurisdiction. I'll have to look for examples, but I'm not aware of any requirements that a unit has to be occupied as a commercial space on a ground floor level. I suppose you could think about, I think it's within a constitutional authority that home rule municipality might have that ability to do it. But typically it's one of those, hey, the market's going to set this, and if it remains vacant for a period of time, then the landowner, the landlord is going to have an incentive to lower the rate to meet the market to get something in there, because they'd rather have something in there than nothing in there. But I don't know. We'd have to do a little research on that. Certainly, Telluride has been fortunate enough that it has not typically had a high vacancy rate. I think that we saw in some of the statistics that I think it was 08, 09.
Yeah.
That was the last spike, and you know what was going on in the economy in 08 and 09. And even that spike wasn't that significant of a spike compared to some other towns that I know I visited in the 08, 09 period of time. So I think we've been pretty fortunate that our economy has been able to sustain a lot of the commercial square footage on Colorado Avenue.
Kathy?
Well, I think Kevin's probably the busiest person that works in this building, but I'm not sure. But maybe Phil can explore and see if other mountain towns or towns, you know, Boulder, whatever, have some kind of things. And what I remember hearing about was a vacancy tax.
Yes.
So if you were vacant, you paid money for that. And I think our fear in the past, and, you know, of course, my perspective of some of our past things is 10 or 20 years ago, is that people would build something like the Peterson building and then put the rent at $500 a square foot. I'm trying to make up a number high enough that no one in this town would do it. And you know, rental rate, and then they would not have the inconvenience of the retail underneath them. They would have their glitzy condo
Right.
on Main Street, plenty of parking because no one else would be parking there, you know, and they could store their car collection, all those little whatever. So I think what we are trying to do is promote vitality and have an incentive that, you know, people can get $100 a square foot. I hope that's not the rate, but if they can, more power to them. But, you know, we should have pressure on our property owners to rent their spaces. And I think we already require that you don't get a CO on your upstairs condos until your retail is done. Is that correct? Or is
I-
that just a PUD?
I'm not sure if it's required to a PUD, certainly the CO would
Yeah.
be tied to what's done.
Yeah, but they can complete the space. I mean, what we've observed is that they can complete the space and then the market incentives are not working because if the condo space is sufficiently luxurious and
Yeah.
people have paid enough for it and they want peace and quiet downstairs, they will simply not rent it or they will set the rate, like
Right.
Kathy said. So,
That's
I think
why
it's worth-
Macy's Disappeared,
yeah,
for instance.
right. And that's where the barber shop and the Peterson building disappeared.
Right.
So you can't get a haircut here anymore if you're a guy. So I think it's worth exploring. And I think this is a topic that we've touched on before. And I think we're now actually asking staff, whoever the right staff is, to take a look at what's going on and what we're allowed to do. So I think that might be a little legal fit.
And I think
Ally
we
might
have an
help.
urgent list of other things that we know we're working on that have very precise deadlines. But so put this on, sometime in the
Longer time.
future, or maybe part of our comprehensive plan work or whatever to explore this, but it's so sad when you go in a historic town, the buildings are falling down and they're all vacant, and what it could be or what it was 30 years ago. It's so sad and I don't want us to ever go that way.
I
Yeah.
think one of the,
Angela.
oh, sorry.
go
Go ahead.
Well,
I didn't. wasn't sure
Angela,
what this
Peter.
was, But.
Yeah.
it's associated with the same subject. And it's a land use thing, but we've talked about having a similar requirement on ADUs,
Oh, that they be occupied.
that they be occupied.
Yeah.
And we've never gone there, but
Well, one step at a time, there might be different practices with respect to commercial space than there are with respect to residential space. Kevin,
Yeah, and actually the example that I'm thinking of is more on the residential scale. I think Crested Butte did something, or at least they presented it to their voters. I thought they did it as a. I can't remember if it was a tax or a fee, and there are legal differences between the two, but you probably know a number of them off the top of your head, but tax definitely has to be voted on under Tabor, and a fee, as long as you have a nexus and you can show that it's proportionate. You can establish it as a fee and not have to go to the voters to exact that fee. We'll look into that. I know that research has already been done, and I know CML has done some work on, they call it kind of a vacancy fee, but in the context of residential is what I've always heard, which is the concern of kind of having your second, third, fourth homeowners who aren't here, but for weeks or a month or two at a time. And then the rest of the time, the house sits vacant. It really isn't. It's not.
yeah,
contributing that
Vancouver did
economic-
something like that too.
Okay.
Yeah. I would-
Angela, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the other part of vitality is if it's vacant, that you be looking at something interesting. That it be like an art mural or something that contributes to the vitality in a different way.
That's a good, yeah, I mean.
I don't know
As
about
we
that.
start getting ideas, or that if it's habitable
like
and
very
it's sure it should be habitable, that you can then loan it out to nonprofits for pop-ups or something, so that there is stuff going on. That you don't just get
There
to
might be a
sit there with. a big-
Reduction in the rate or something, if
Yeah.
you do that.
Kevin, you're grinning at me.
That's right.
He's grimacing.
That gets into more of the, that's kind of the traditional takings model of
Okay,
government.
Yeah, if you're requiring, you're requiring the use. All right, Peter, you had a question.
So we'll
But
research.
the gist is to get something going on,
Yeah.
not just blank craft paper like the Chase Bank was for.
Yeah.
It's not going to make me
Couple of
happy if
years.
what they can do is just put a statue in front of the window.
No, me either.
Okay.
and.
Wait, wait, wait.
The third page in your packet, the Excel, kind of this year over year measurement exercise, this inventory. The category of bar and restaurant caught my eye. It's not that it's changed. It seems pretty consistent. I know it came up in our last meeting just related to the land use code, things were being contemplated, whether restaurants might not be incentivized. That didn't end up changing, is my recollection last month, but I see them here and it makes me curious. If restaurants separate from bars, I see them lumped together and I don't know that anything has changed in either category and that might be very steady. but just related to the conversation we had last month, whether we're incentivizing them correctly or if we shouldn't. We wanted to raise that as a,
I think we're still incentivizing them. I think they're
Yeah.
called out specifically through PUD still.
which I recall.
But
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I thought the conversation last time where one person thought once something became a restaurant, it should stay a restaurant forever. And I mean, there's some reuse, stuff. It's so much work and installation and a lot of carbon footprint to get all that equipment in there and then to throw it away in 2 years and put in fancy dresses is kind of silly, but again, I think that's probably close to takings, but if you have an incentive or you did no parking, et cetera, then there'll be a lot of pressure on you to keep it as a restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can require a restaurant if it's done through a PUD as a public benefit. I have not, since I've been here, seen a PUD for a restaurant as a public benefit. And in all the PUDs I look at regularly to look up what was approved, I can't remember one that I've stumbled on for a restaurant as a PUD public benefit.
No, it's not identified.
Right.
No, and I think people have just taken advantage of the parking
Right,
rule for the
yes.
restaurant use, but not the more serious PUD commitment.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
as
Are there other comments about this inventory? Kevin has a
I
comment.
thought Petite Maison went through the PUD process for
Oh.
the restaurant.
okay, they
Yeah,
probably
not-
did.
you're right.
Yeah. That's good.
No one-
But I think your point was, in the change that I recall that council is taking up or took up, first reading,
Yeah.
it was requiring if it was going to be that restaurant use that it be deed restricted. So
Yes.
there's an additional commitment beyond the PUD and then the PUD amendment process would actually have to be affirmatively deed restricted, which I think was
Right.
very.
We've
logical.
done with several.
Yeah.
PUDs recently.
Kathy,
Yeah, and just going back to the craft paper comment earlier, one of my friends in Lawson who doesn't come into town a whole lot said to me, oh my gosh, I went to downtown Telluride and everything is vacant. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was talking about, we have all the changes right now with the former Telluride Vale sports stuff changing. We have Ethos and Rustler and, whatchamajigger, Maddie's other thing, we had all this stuff moving around. We have khakis just papered over because they're not here, all of this, but and I was like, no, there's only, like 3 things vacant, they're just all moving around. But, if you drove into town, especially a week or 2 ago, it looked pretty shut down from all the paper on the windows. And I guess we just have to live with that, but I am getting comments from out of town locals that are like, what's going on? And they hadn't heard any of the rumors about who was going where.
well, I think, we won't come back to this topic for a couple months probably. So when we do, hopefully these changes the shuffle will have settled down.
Right.
And we will have a better idea of what the vacancy actually looks like and whether we need to address it or what we need to be thinking about for the future. Do Charles or Lucia, do you have any comments on this topic? No? Okay. Anybody else? Any more thoughts on this one? I think the staff knows what we've asked them to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. All right. Let's move on to our next work session item. These are land use code amendments. This is a work session to discuss potential amendments to the land use code pertaining to new construction on lots with a pre-construction grade of 25% greater in residential zone districts. New construction with below grade site coverage in residential zone districts, and new construction which includes 2 or more levels below grade in residential zone districts per land use code section 5-201C. And our staff member is Jonna.
Thank you, P&Z members, for having me here this evening to do this work session. We did a very similar work session at Hark last evening. And I would just say that Peter is a glutton for punishment because he sat through that. So, no spoilers here. So I wanted to share real quickly, and I don't know if you can see that. Let me see if I can.
No.
Make it a little bit bigger.
It's kind of hard.
Okay,
It's,
is that better?
you're just gonna have to tell us what it says. That's better.
Still,
Maybe just look at this top portion. We have put together a potential timeline. This is our timeline goal for getting these land use code amendments through the process. As you mentioned, we do have deadlines associated with them. So the process is going to be pretty intense for the next several months. We have work sessions and reviews and recommendations booked at almost every Harkin P&Z meeting kind of through the summer. So this is a little bit subject to change. Obviously, Ron isn't available to be here tonight. So, some of the dates may shift as we move along. We may get ahead of schedule. We could possibly get behind schedule, but this is kind of our goal. So we do have a roadmap I wanted to share. Also, as you recall, on March 28th, Town Council enacted the temporary suspension of 6 items. And so far, 2 of those are well on their way to being approved. As you recall, on April 27th, you had a joint meeting with Hark on the PUD issue and the residential commercial zone district issue. And as Kevin mentioned, those have already been through first reading at Town Council. So we can check those off. The ballot question 300 conversation we anticipate now we'll have in June. Pending a reschedule of your work session. And then the other 3 items, number 4, 5, and 6, all have to do kind of with basements and below grade area. These we're finding far more complicated than the others, you might imagine. And I will go through kind of these issues one at a time. In reverse order. I'm going to start with 6 because it's the easier, and then talk about number 5 and then number 4, and then some ideas or possible ways to approach this. But before I start, I'd really like to get your ideas or your goals for this discussion and for these amendments. At the retreat with Hark and Town Council, I heard some of you have opinions about these issues, and I'd like to kind of frame that before we jump into possible solutions. So if you recall, or if you have goals, I would like to hear them.
All right. So should we just start talking
I am
at
ready
you?
to take notes.
Great. Well, my recollection of the retreat, let's start there, is that, and maybe people have thought about it since they have other things to add or refinements, is that people are concerned that very large structures with considerable underground footprints are being built on steep lots. And that I heard at least 2 concerns at the meeting. One was that when you put a huge block of cement underground on the hill, it does affect the way water runs on the hill, and it affects how the lots below it and around it are affected. And so there's I don't know what you call it, an environmental concern that you can't just dig freely underground. It does matter to your neighbors. Not only during the construction period where you have to use shoring and still things can happen, but afterwards, for kind of forever, because we have hillsides on which the water runs kind of through the hill. So that was one concern. The other concern that I heard at that meeting was that people didn't really like the idea, and this was more of an aesthetic concern, I believe, but it also has to do with square footage allowed on the lot. The way we were resulting with these sort of hotel looking many levels of house extending far back into the hill again. And people were concerned about how that wasn't really appropriate for the town. And that's more about a design guidelines issue, I think, but that it didn't really fit with the type of residential development that we have so to date. I'll stop there and see what other thoughts people have about, let's try to structure it. So talk about what we heard at the retreat, and then do people have other thoughts? Yes, Kathy.
I think I heard other people say that we shouldn't have houses in the residential zones, maybe not RC, but we're addressing that separately, but everything else that's residential over 4,000 square feet. Obviously, some of that, if you go below grade, but maybe there's a ratio, you shouldn't have 4,000 feet above grade and another 4,000 feet below grade. There should be a ratio of what you get, maybe what you're allowed above grade and then what you get to do below grade. At the same time, I also heard concerns that I happen to concur with, that with some historic restoration projects, putting 2 levels or a level and a half below grade is the best thing you can do. And then keep the stuff above grade smaller and more, not a lot of huge things attached to it. So, I mean, I think maybe you can get a double basement under a rated structure if the rest of the structure or the rest of the above grade development is quite small. You can't do that to get a huge house, but you can do it. And we have zones where we allow units bigger than 4,000 square feet above grade. And I think we made those zones very intentionally. I'm now going to my feelings, sorry, but those were very intentional decisions in the 90s to have these limits. And over 25 years, almost 30 years, there've been workarounds, and now there's both better shoring and foundation methods and the money to pay to maximize things. So you might be meeting your above grade limit, but you're way, you have tons of underground space.
I'm gonna show you some examples.
Yeah.
Some other examples.
All right, Todd.
My recollection and concerns are the same as you expressed. The impact on subsurface water flows. And allied with that comes the need to build a foundation and or a pumping system to keep these things dewatered. On the hillside, that's not as big of a problem as when we get down into the lower part of the alluvial fan, but we can all walk by a project
Every day.
that requires a sump pump that runs constantly this time of year. And that's not ideal for a bunch of reasons. So what we do in land use code ought to be thinking about that. And then as you said, Eleni, the ability to put most of the hillside structure subsurface allows the square footage, but we're also getting 4- and 5-story facades, which is not what the look and feel of Telluride wants to be, at least in my opinion.
Other comments, Angela?
Yeah, to speak to the site situation, which I think was what I tried to express, was there's a cumulative impact that I don't think we have assumed or we have actually investigated. And there was some discussion about 6-foot setbacks are not sufficient. That there's not enough to do that between the window wells and all the other site components like irrigation and drainage and snow storage and all of that. That we have not, now that we start getting closed in, we haven't really thought that through. And for me, the hydrology, the effect of groundwater cumulatively digging into those hillsides that are, pretty much gravel, they drain, but the cumulative impact of digging and we have now a clientele that is willing to pay for that. And I don't think we faced that up until about 10 years ago. We didn't really face that kind of dynamic. Let's put it that way. And the case in point that I point to is the house that's under construction at the end of Alder? No. Anyway, it's 5 stories.
Columbia.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Columbia. It's looming over town. And the aesthetic or mass and scale from our, isn't it?
Alder in Columbia?
Alder and Galena.
Yeah, it's up, it's actually
It's
at the
pretty
end
far.
of that street. I'm sorry, I don't remember which street.
It's
it is.
next door to Tommy Hines'
Oh,
personal house. I
that's
think that's
Galena,
what we're
yeah.
talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that we haven't had that in town. We've had it, out. But in town, it somehow doesn't feel a Telluride scale, for lack of a better term. And so that 5, 6 story, whatever it is they can do. We'll see what it looks like when it's finished, but right now it just is horrifying. Just on.
I can't see if Charles or Lishay want to comment. But if they, Piper, can you see if they want to comment?
No raised hands.
Okay, Peter. if you have anything more to say.
I watched the retreat. I wasn't there for it, but remember it being raised and kind of posed as a question, is this it is different, and is that okay? Which appears different, or is that wrong? And I know the guidelines address steeper hillsides, and historically those steep slopes were avoided because
Right.
they were impractical to build on, and putting the things that make sense down in the middle of town up there doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I know these are challenges with that, very visible and steep, and that steep translates into many stories because you can't go horizontally. But I gathered, I think if I'm remembering correctly, and I might be blurring presentations a little, and a few, that from a staff level, there's a level of concern, or things don't seem to be maybe as expected with the percentages that are above or below, and that projects might be rather large, but in a more traditional floor area way of thinking about them, they aren't. And they're quite visible. And so it's interesting too, and I look back at the hillside or the hillside zones, that larger homes, Kathy, are permitted there, 5,000, and I had forgotten that, not 4,000, like the bulk of everywhere else, mostly in town.
In HD1.
Yeah.
HD1, not the others. Okay, so that's a curiosity to me too. And I will say in your other presentations, Jana, with how small, comparatively small the floor areas are above ground.
Right, so we're gonna get into that. No spoilers.
Sure.
All right, so do people have other concerns that they want to articulate as goals of the amendments at this time? I think
Lachey's hand is raised.
Lishay.
Hey, I was gonna echo what Kathy was saying about, I believe you guys are talking about Steve Finger's house that's next to Tommy Hines. And currently, obviously, that is being built out. So it does look huge because we're actually seeing the structure of what's in ground. But I've seen a lot of those houses done really well where they're the setback, and I've actually seen the final drawings for Steve Finger's house, and it is multi-level. Like Peter was saying, it's hard to go diagonal without making it look big from the front because you're seeing the horizontalness of the home. But they've all been really well done, and I feel like they've been done in a way that obviously from the front they look big, but inside they're not terribly big. And I feel like I'm more concerned about the environmental damage and maybe concerns, because like Peter said, we set the guidelines and they're following them. So I have a trouble when town council members just say they feel big, and I don't know if I like that. we set the guidelines and they're following them. And I feel like there's just something funny about that when it's just an opinion. So I have trouble with that.
Yeah, Luce, I would agree. We need to have a rationale. We need to have a basis for that. I'm getting to the goals of what John is mentioning is something that it's up to us, I think, to really define well, or this is not going to go well for us. Speaking as a planner, you need to have that kind of rigorous understanding of what it is you're trying to do and why. So defining what it is that, feels too big, we need to get to. And maybe it's a height issue, how many layers can you go, kind of thing. But tie it back to what the town itself has always had it historically as a basis to define, I guess, what I'm calling Telluride scale. Because we're getting into a whole nother realm that we haven't actually done. So my goal for the amendments is to help to define that, as well as tie it to legitimate concern about the cumulative effect of on the general environment and hydrology, geology, and all of that. And if something fails, what's going to happen in the sump pump situation, for instance, or in a concrete foundation failure of some kind has tremendous, and that may not be a risk that we are willing as a community to stomach, if you will, but we have to define that.
Todd, sorry, and then we'll let you continue, John, in a little bit.
This is very helpful.
Yeah, there's another angle about this that we haven't talked about. And that is the embodied energy that is going into particularly these huge concrete foundations. The carbon footprint of concrete is not ideal. And when we're seeing this, there's some way in my mind to tie that to our environmental goals.
Our climate action plan.
Well,
Climate action plan,
action plan, but it doesn't get there directly that I know of.
It's
But
a
that-
green building code kind of approach.
Mhm.
Well, except there aren't any building codes about that I'm aware of. Maybe they're coming in the next, but nobody has, nothing that I have read says that anybody is starting to propose limits on concrete.
Lead kind of got to that somewhat in the embodied energy you're talking about,
Right.
and the need to think about deconstruction as well as construction. So
Anyway, that's a piece of it. And the other one is more, excuse me, design guideline. But when we get multiple stories in these hillside lots with windows and doors, the light spill when they're occupied, which may not be a lot, but that's going against our goals of trying to be more dark sky friendly. And even if they're interior lights, they're still visible to the town when they're on the hillside. Now, that's
another criteria.
well, it's a
Absolutely.
criteria, but it fits more in Park's piece than ours. Unless, again, somehow it gets tied to the environmental side of it.
Peter,
It's a challenging, it's a reality. There's a lot of glass on these south faces because all the other
Everything else-
walls are all concrete.
that's right.
And it's, I don't have any data, but I'd say that though they look like they're glass houses, they have every comparatively less window to floor area ratios, I guarantee you, than
Yep.
houses where we all live. And so
We see
I
them all
understand
once.
that, but it's sort of not a small challenge, like having somebody build a 4-story house on a hill and not have windows is
Hmm,
not without its like, what kind of challenge? So.
yeah. So John, was that
Yes.
Not a
helpful?
solar tube.
Very, I appreciate this very much because we, staff and even Hark have struggled kind of, knowing what the problem is specifically.
Well, I think
but
we've
I'm gonna-
identified
I'm gonna move
3.
on.
I think we've identified 3. One is the cumulative impact of blocks of cement in the ground
Mhm.
and the water on the water flows. The second is the scale or appropriateness of the size of house compared to other parts of Telluride. And the third one might be the environmental impact of the way they're constructed necessarily.
Yes. So,
Climate impacts.
yes,
Mm.
so I'm going to walk through I'm gonna remind you of the items that have been suspended specifically and talk a little bit about what those mean and what those impacts are. And then I'm going to present some possible approaches that staff have brainstormed and we have brought in, previous planners, current planners, all the input we can get on these issues because they're complicated,
Mhm.
very complicated. So what I'm bringing you tonight are not recommendations. They're ideas for you, for all of us to discuss and kind of see which direction you all think might be the best to go. And it may be none of those, it may be something else, but I'm going to start so we can keep moving. Unless there's anything else you want to say.
I think we're clear.
Okay. So I said I was gonna go in these in reverse order, and number 6 of the suspended items are all development applications for new construction, which include 2 or more levels below grade in the residential zone districts. And just as shorthand, we're calling these double basements. We haven't seen many of these proposed yet. This one on the left has been approved by Hark. What you're looking at here is above the outline in purple is the basement plan. There's a historic house above this basement. And then there is a second basement below the historic house. I think kind of getting at what Kathy said about maybe historic houses being entitled to more. I'm not providing addresses of any of these because it doesn't matter. They're just examples that I wanted to show you. This example is another that's been approved by Hark. Also historic. This front portion is a historic structure. The outline here in red is the basement, and then below is another basement, a double basement. This example on the right has not been approved. This was a work session. This is a hillside lot. These other lots are in town, not flat, but not steep. And this is a very steep lot on the hillside. This is the first one we've seen that has a basement below entry level on the hillside. So these are the types of double basements that we are starting to see. Not a lot yet, but we are starting to see them. So this is kind of the issue. We always look to Aspen really for examples or what they're doing. Aspen, I don't know how long ago, prohibited more than one level below grade, more double basements. They had a proposal which was approved, I think, for an underground basketball court. So it was a very, very
famous.
deep.
Yep.
And so after that, I think it prompted them to take a look at the same kind of issue. So they now have a prohibition against double basements, and any basement can be no more than 15 feet deep. So that is an example of that. So, we realized that basements under relatively, or houses on relatively flat lots are different than basements on slope lots, because on slope lots, you're going to have stacked basements. That's how they're constructed. So, how we frame this or how we write this, I think we'll have to, differentiate between sloped lots and flat lots or less steep lots. Right now, in the suspension, we identified 25% or more as a steep lot. That's based on some analysis we did of projects that we've reviewed in the last several years. And so, but that could also change.
May I just say on that subject, I think it's a further point of sort of clarity when you get into settling on what that percentage is, how much of any given lot. You're getting these hillside lots are going to have many ranges of slopes, and we're going to be getting into what percentage of that steepness underlies the building. And
It's the slope of the site coverage. It's not the slope of the entire lot, but it is the slope of the footprint of the building.
but it's going to be a
And
variety.
that's
It's going
pretty
to be
standard in the
some
code.
more and less than that in all cases. And so if you have a square foot that's at 25, does that trigger you into? And again, we don't answer this, but it's just going to be
Or
It's
is it
an
kind of,
average.
further levels
It's an-
of like.
it's-
inquiry
Some
into
that are
what
steep to
what
start
falls
and
into
then
this.
they
They're
back.
flat at the bottom and it goes straight
Yes.
up.
you have to average it out.
It's, yes, and it is of the building footprint, not of the entire lot, which is how our code,
So basically you take the four corners and then you see what the slope is?
yes.
Okay.
For instance, like, I'm
Average it
looking
out.
on a property just somewhere in town, and there's a portion of it that's got a steep embankment. Might be comparatively small. If that is steeper than 25%, that could, it's not kind of worded
Right.
the way you want, it could trigger it being scrutinized similarly, and I'm saying that might be right and intended, but it's also something that will
Point,
be
yeah.
painful to
So it
figure out.
may need to be the average. Yeah, okay. But I think we're all in agreement that they're different on steep lots and less steep lots. I guess it would be a good time to ask how you all think about double basements. Kathy brought up the idea of maybe providing or allowing those on historic structures specifically. Is this a problem?
Can I ask, what was Aspen's rationale for preventing them? I mean, they didn't like the basketball court, but that's not a rationale.
I think that was the rationale.
No, seriously.
I
I'm
think it's the
not
impact.
involved, but I think this was a while ago. I think neighbors complained because it took years to excavate. And it was like, what in the heck is going on?
Yeah.
All right, so it
And
was,
They could
partly
go
the
to China
construction.
and nothing is stopping them. If that's what they want to do, they could be at this forever.
Yeah.
And I think they said, okay, we got to put some.
I don't
So it was the
understand.
time it took for construction and the impact on the neighbors of the construction process. Well, that's fair. That's a good rationale.
This is all just secondhand.
It's a perfectly good
my
rationale to me.
recollection, But not anything official, but.
I mean,
So do you think that double basements are fine? They're not visible? You don't know they're there. Is there a reason or a rationale that we should?
If you want to live in a
Not allowed.
cave, I don't understand.
So
why.
defining what a double basement is a wide open thing. My sort of, if you
Well,
pull up like
yeah.
your section views. And the wording on that Aspen example. In that Aspen example, there was one where there was a basement below. Is that the one on the right, Shauna?
Yes,
So there's a basement on a hillside below the arrival.
yes,
That would be allowed under the Aspen example.
yes.
Because it's not more than one story down from,
I believe
grade.
It would, yes.
so that's
But then this is 4 stories tall, so
not the question.
that's not.
yeah, no, we're talking about double basements.
Three,
Defining a double
levels.
basement's a little trickier.
but in this example, 3 levels above the entry level are also basements.
That's exactly right. So the defining double basements, and to that point, good luck getting rid of double basements on steep hillsides.
Well, that's
It's
why
not
we're
gonna happen.
differentiating the two,
Yeah.
putting them in different
Right.
piles and different
So
buckets.
for this conversation, you want us to focus on not steep?
Well, she gave us. two
I'm
types of
asking you,
lots.
is this
Distinguish.
acceptable? Yeah. In either case, do you want to see additional living space more than one level below grade?
That
Todd.
has no.
Todd,
goodness.
Well, thinking back to the reasons we were concerned about this. If you can't see it and they're willing to play basketball in a hole, do we care? And there are, I can think of two reasons why we might want to care. The first is water movement, hydrology. And I know we've had studies on various structures the town has built, including Sunnyside, that took that into account. So is there, this is just asking, is there methodology or expertise that we should tap before we start talking about the aesthetics of it?
That's
Mhm.
where I was going. There's a hydrostatic pressure issue when you go that deep, and it tends to displace groundwater. And then that creates pressure elsewhere. That's the cumulative effect I'm talking about.
Yeah, so there's that, and I think we just identified by talking about Aspen, another criteria, which is, it does matter. The construction process, and especially now that we have so much construction, people are starting to ask for people to wait, for some control of the construction. So the construction process and how long it takes to build these things is also, I think, a legitimate consideration for perhaps
A
saying
fourth
no
wall.
double basement.
Well, and then the other thing that this speaks to me about is the energy that gets embodied in here,
Mhm.
both in the construction process, the concrete, the heating, the cooling, everything else. That there's a huge environmental footprint that we ought to care about, even if we can't see it.
Peter, you have your hand up?
I do, this came up last night too, and was a recollection from the retreat. It does seem needed to justify some of that, to talk to engineers, people who are geotechs or hydrologists, or you have a town engineer. I have just comparatively less concern about the hydrology on hillsides with the steepness and the lower wetter part. That said, I don't know. I'm not an engineer. Water is going to run down, but it is hydrology wise, I don't think is much of a challenge. I think it is challenging to build on these sites, and it is quite impactful. And so I think some background to see if that makes sense or how that can be
Can
quantified.
somebody, explain to me why? What is that a living space? Is that a bedroom?
Why do they
with
want it?
no light? They want more square footage, they want more people in there, I guess, but it just seems to me totally impractical.
We
It
talking
makes no sense.
hillside?
Yeah.
Or-
No, I
Why
don't-
would you
basement.
have?
Why do you want a double basement?
Well, the middle example is a project I'm very familiar with, and it's a historic house. It's not a hillside, but
Right.
that was a lengthy HARC review. It did get approved. It's under construction. It grew a second basement. And in that process, there's a 3-story house that's lower than the 1-story historic. And so that process of getting sort of push, it accommodates a 4th bedroom for a family of 5.
Rather than live with the size of the lot you have, they just go down.
Well, you're in the historic district, and it is a decent sized historic kind of lot, and you can't build in front of it. You can't push the things to the back. Good.
But there's uses that are appropriate, Angela, having built more
Yeah,
of these, and I want
That's
to.
why I'm asking.
So laundry rooms, you want a second home, you want to flip your linens pretty fast. if you're doing it yourself or when you're cleaning crew. So you might have double washer and dryers. You might not just have that little Bosch stacker in the master closet. You might have like a real laundry room with holding and the storage for the linens. Boiler rooms, the latest boilers are getting smaller. If we all go beneficial
pumps.
electric, we'll see, the heat pumps, we'll see, but you know, with all the zone valves and everything, boiler rooms can be pretty large and need to be pretty large and to have the however much hot water storage. And some of that's going to be obsolete, but we don't know that yet or when it is. And then the other thing that I've mostly seen down there, rather than a bedroom, sometimes a bedroom is like a game room. So you're going to have a giant TV, you're going to have, you know, maybe a pool table. It's not stuff where you need to look out the window or where you need to be asleep and escape or whatever. So those all make the house function better. And these are people who can afford this space. So I'm not against them having that space. If they want to put a bunk room down there, I might tell them they're going to kill their children or their grandchildren, but the other uses are just fine.
Leisha?
Yeah, I was just gonna say here, I understand the concern about a double basement, especially when we're talking about the water flow or the environmental impact and the climate impact. But I feel like what we're addressing is more the height in this case, even though again, it's on a vertical, but now we're looking at a 4-story home from the ground level. So I feel like that is gonna be more of what we're the context than the fact that it happens to be 5 floors.
Right.
You're talking about the third example.
Oh, sorry, exactly.
Kathy?
First I'll admit that my rental duplex next door to my house has got 5 different levels in it, and at least 2 levels count as basements. And it's 2 units that are de facto non-deed restricted employee housing and my art space and parking for cars and other things like motorcycles. And I don't think it really looks like 5 stories, but if you walk by, it is. They're kind of tucked away. So it's all about the design in one way. But I'm also concerned because next door to me, they are almost done with, or they're done with the foundation. They're about to start framing, but they've got, you know, their whole lot is kind of ringed in pilings, and they're all kind of pretty waterproof. And then the houses, 2 more houses are going to happen next door on 25-foot wide lots. And then 1 more new house is going to happen on a wider lot. And I don't know what their agreement, I know what my agreement is with my immediate neighbor, but I don't know, but I can just kind of see them, hooking their shoring onto the existing shoring, and then I'll have 120 feet of shoring at a level above my house. And my house has partly a concrete foundation, but partly concrete block, and have a whole lot of underground water. It's pushed against that concrete block, it's going to destroy it. So I'm very, very concerned. And there's more water on the hillside than most people realize, having dug a lot on the hillside. I maybe have done 10, I sometimes count 10 or 12 steep lot, more than 25% lot, steep houses on the hillside. I did the last house that's downhill off of Tomboy, which is the hardest thing of all, is to work downhill with no below the lot access. The work up is much easier. I mean, I cannot tell you, like the streams we've seen flowing by during construction, and we very carefully diverted. Kind of knew about them, whatever. But now that I'm going to have this 100-foot wall, I think, I'm like, where's that water going to go? It's going to go to structures that weren't built to withstand it, is what's going to happen.
I haven't seen this wall, but my experience with vertical micro piles, which is the most common sort of
Yeah.
shoring, is that
So the water will go.
water will perk through and not at that any individual column, but the gaps are very open. And
Okay.
I don't think there's damming that I've seen with that.
There's a solid wall to the back of that, isn't there?
But yes, that's a foundation wall. The shoring allows you to
Yeah.
build that wall. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm more worried about this continuous shoring wall. If it's
Yes.
porous, they'll still be, but it's hard to imagine, the 6 feet in any window wells and the shoring do not
Right.
fit. It's not 6 feet, it's 3 feet. So it's 6 feet between the 2
Right.
buildings. And if I've built a 14-foot wide house, it's gone now. It's fine. But it's really hard to build in a functional 14-foot wide house. A 19-foot wide house certainly seems spacious. So I mean, this is a tough conundrum because of the size of our lots and how much water flows in our hillside. There's more than one, there's not just the secret parts of Coronet Creek. There's a lot of creeks up there coming down off of our
Yeah,
hillside.
and if the result of the post-construction is that you have basically a concrete wall replacing the shoring wall with small gaps between, I think somebody should be studying what's going to happen to the water flows in that case, because it strikes me that we're going to have intense water flows in that spot. That just seems
It's like
logical.
creating a flash flood.
Yeah. And then I have one other thing. If we're gonna do these basements anywhere, whether they think they're in, whether you know you're close to the river or whatever, we need to require a waterproof proofing additive. It's kind of like bear proof, nothing's really waterproof. But to do just straight concrete from the batch plant is stupid. You should be using, and when I was working, it was Zypex. I don't know. I think there's other brands of product that's put in at the batch plant, increases your cost, per cubic yard, but it makes your concrete, you still have to waterproof it on the outside, but it makes the actual concrete wall much more waterproof. You need to do that in your slabs, your footers, your walls, so we don't have to have continuous pumping, which we supposedly don't allow, but it is going on right now.
I would say that the sump pump situation is unsustainable. Both from a climate standpoint and from a maintenance over time, no matter what they say. I know that the River Club and the whatever next to it continually cut pumps into the river with a sump pump, and it failed this year.
So I think where we're going with this, John, is
You
that
want to keep
Keep
going?
high level.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but I think where we're going with this, John, is that the water concern at least might be site specific. There's a concern about whether a double basement is a good thing or not. Might strongly relate to, well, what's happening to the water on this site?
Mhm.
Or
Um,
the neighborhood.
And how long will it end the construction process?
Okay,
Sorry.
that's
You're
all-
talking about.
I'm just summarizing.
really good. And I have to tell you, this is a completely different conversation than we had with Hark last
Well,
night, which
sure,
was
we're
really
different.
Great.
That's good.
So I am gonna move on to number 5, which has to do with bonus site coverage. And I don't know how much all of you are familiar with our bonus site coverage section in our code. I will describe it, but this item of the suspension says that applications for development for new construction, which include below grade floor area in excess of the allowable site coverage in our residential zone districts, and we call that bonus site coverage. I will briefly explain what that
I
means.
think many of us were on that board when we
Yeah,
adopted
this was
it.
about 8 years ago, I think this was adopted. So in residential, historic residential and hillside transitional zone districts, these projects are allowed an additional 10% of the lot area for additional site coverage or
It was an
basement-
incentive, as I recall.
basement space.
Yeah, keep your above grade small.
There
Yeah.
are several rules that go along with this additional site coverage. It has to be 100% below grade. It has to project beyond where the traditional foundation wall would meet the wall above grade. It's something extra beyond the normal foundation. It can't be visible from above grade through window wells or egress stairs or anything. You can't see it from above grade. It can't be more than 525 square feet on larger lots. If you have a lot that would allow, 10% more than 525, you're limited at 525. It can't be less than 3 feet from the property line. And if it's more than one level below grade, each level counts as part of your
Square footage.
It's counted separately, so it counts towards your 10%, each level count towards your 10%. So, this was, I think, kind of a benefit for, residential lots when the side yard setbacks were lessened on larger lots. This was the compromise, I believe, wasn't here at the time. This is probably part of our development code that is used inappropriately the most. People don't understand it. They don't know how to use it. They don't understand the restrictions or the rules with it. I've just for fun, I've added examples of in every way this part of the code has been not
Manipulated.
complied with. So here's a window well adjacent to this green area, which is 151 square feet of site coverage bonus. Here it is proposed within 1 foot 7 inches of the lot line. Over here, this is an area under the front porch, which includes windows. This one actually is compliant. It's 2 levels, so it would count separately for each level. But people struggle with using this. A lot of people do not use it because they do not understand how to use it. There are only a couple of applicants we work with really who use it consistently. But for applicants and even staff, it is hard to administer. And I can guarantee you there are projects out there that have that are not compliant with these rules.
How did they get built?
Yes, because it's very easy to make mistakes with this part of the code. This is being discussed because it's part of the basement discussion. I will show you a few examples of how this is being used. In this example on the left, this is a hillside project. They used only 41 square feet of their bonus. They could have had probably, I don't know, 300 square feet, and I guess they used 41. This project, they used 241 square feet, but broken up into different areas. And then this project down here used a full 525 square feet allowed, again, kind of broken up into different areas, a lot of times to connect the primary structure below grade to an accessory structure. I think I'm interested to hear your conversation about this. Again, it's not visible, doesn't affect aesthetics or any mass and scale above grade. But I'm curious what you might have to say again about additional environmental impacts or the complexity of foundations cause increased use of concrete. There's more embodied energy in more complex shapes than simple shapes. And this seems to create more complex shapes. Anyway, I don't know if you all have strong feelings about this provision of our code, but it is associated with basements.
Angela,
I have concerns when it might address permeability of the site. So if it's say underneath, creates hardscape underneath an area, say for instance, that you might grow a tree, or you might have some other feature. There's so much air, there's so little area left in these footprints for exterior use as well as permeability, that that cumulative effect, other than what the other cumulative effect we were talking about on hillsides, can be substantial. And I'm not sure I understand exactly what the at grade impact is, but I know that it would affect, again, the permeability of the site, and we don't have any stormwater requirements on these that I know of. I'm not sure if our so-called dry wells are working that were, intended to take care of that kind of thing. I just think that it's a problem to be investigated.
Peter? do you-
I don't want to comment on whether it's a problem or not, but I will say my recollection being a part of the last, those 8 years ago, land use rewrites with you guys, was that it would, the bonus site coverage area wasn't tethered to the setbacks in my recollection, other than there's a restriction not to put them in the minimum setbacks. But that it was in response to a reduction of floor area and a skew of the formula allowable in the residential zones to reduce approximately a bedroom above ground. And forgotten his name, the attorney, and examples at that time were that there were primary homes approved and allowably so that had 3-story rears to the alley. And the alley being a level down, kind of below Main Street, that it was just a kind of an imposing reality, and that making more stepping at the rears was the goal. And it was seen as a kind of a, let's say a taking, but this was a balancing of addressing that above ground and pairing with the mechanical spaces and things that can go below ground, giving them places to be. That's my recollection.
That's my recollection as well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kathy?
And that's my recollection, but then I don't buy the idea that it's making necessarily more concrete or more complex concrete. Because even on the, I think a historic project in the center, you're squaring up in the front corner where it's under the front porch, you're suddenly making one big rectangle. I mean, it's the same amount of concrete, whether it dents in or whether it's just a square. And then the one over that's, got all the little pink hatch marks. Again, maybe we do other requirements to make their foundations efficient and not go zigzagging in and out, but we still let them have their 10% because they can make a big efficient for rectangle and then put a more interesting house on top of it. So I mean, I think the efficiency in the concrete might not get worse because of these. And then I do appreciate the idea that you can have a garage and a total underground connector to your main house. So you can have your garage on the alley, no visual, have that backyard space we want, but you can go down the stairs in your garage, go along and come up in your house. And I don't think we want to do anything to prevent that. Because it both helps us preserve antique alley buildings as garages, and it keeps the backyard, and we're not doing some convoluted above grade connector that disturbs a lot of things as well.
My sense is that most people are in favor of keeping this. I think we need to simplify it.
Right. We
Yeah.
need
Yeah,
to-
my main concern with this is that people seem to have trouble with it, and so does the
Yeah.
staff.
Yes.
So can
So
you,
make it easier to
can you
administer.
guys
Yeah.
write it and
Yes.
explain it and give, diagrams so that any, a first grader making up the design instead of trained, someone with training
It could be much better written.
could
for
figure it
sure.
out.
Yes, okay. The
Hey,
next,
Donna,
yes, sorry.
Thinking back to the previous one, plus this, and we're nowhere close to it, but I can see down the road that the climate action plan, the restrictions end up being the total energy budget
Mm,
rather than
Yeah.
so much
Specifically, that's one thing.
square feet or anything else.
yeah,
Another consultant.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another consultant. yeah.
More
Kids need a job.
middles. I like that idea. So, item number 4 of the suspensions were development applications for new construction on lots with a pre-construction grade or slope of the building site coverage of 25% or greater in the residential zone districts.
That looks
And
like Sheep Mountain.
It looks like Ajax.
this is steep.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
So
I've built on stuff that's.
It looks like Ajax to me.
what would you say? Do you
Yeah.
think that's probably 60 or 70?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
very steep. And this is really the most difficult one to get our heads around. And here's where I will present a few possible approaches that we've explored. The first one is the Aspen model. It's not the same as the basement model. It's a different way of calculating floor area that I'll explain. Another idea is changing the way we calculate below grade or basement space. One other is limiting the number of stories. That's come up a few times in controlling the mass and scale, especially on hillside lots. Limiting the facade width was something I think maybe Hart came up with. This is more of a concern on wider lots that aren't as deep on the
Yeah.
hillside.
Yeah.
And then,
They end up looking like motels.
yes, and then maybe we talk about a total area, and I think that just came up a few minutes ago of combining above and below grade floor. So kind of walk. So the way that Telluride calculates a basement space is anything that's 50% or more below grade. So in this model, here in the middle, I illustrated the percentage of area below grade. And then here on the outside, this is the amount of floor area that's counted above grade. So on this first level, it's 100% below grade. It doesn't count towards your floor area. 94% is below grade on the second level. Again, it's less, or it's more than 50% below grade, so it counts as 0. Same on the third floor, it counts as 0. Not until we get to the fourth floor do we count any of the floor area because it's less than 50% below grade.
Oh.
So this house that could be 5,000 or 6,000 square feet counts as 766 square feet. The Aspen model counts actual above grade floor area. So same model, same percentages, but they're counting everything that's shaded orange. So instead of 0, 0, 0, first level is 323 square feet above grade. This third level is 592 square feet above grade. And then top level is 275 feet above grade. This seems a more logical approach to counting floor area. Surprisingly, in the analysis that we've done on approved project, it doesn't make a huge difference if we do it the Telluride way or the Aspen. It's within a couple hundred feet on most projects, and most of them are far less. That was surprising because this Aspen way seems to make sense. It's actually what you see above grade.
Right.
Yeah. Somehow our way averages out.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Hark asked me to look at more projects and get a better kind of cross-section of projects, so that could change, but what we're seeing right now is that it doesn't make a huge difference. The next approach would be to change the way we calculate basements. So right now, basements are defined as 50% or more below grade. So same model, same percentages below grade. Under the 50% rule, again, only this top floor, the fourth floor, is counted as actual floor area. If we changed our definition to a basement is 75% or more below grade, that would cause the levels 3 and 4 to be counted as floor area. And if we changed it to be 100% below grade, which a lot of communities do, only the ground floor would be considered basement and below grade. The rest would count as floor area. So again, kind of running some examples, 75% does nothing for the projects that we have approved.
Doesn't change it.
Doesn't change anything. I think 100% changes a lot. There's probably some sweet spot between 75% and 100%. I don't know what it is. I don't know the numbers, but 100% makes a lot of our existing approved projects non-compliant. It pushes them over the edge, almost all of them.
So in order to get them into compliance, what would have had to be done? Floor?
They'd have to, yes.
Which would reduce the mass and scale that's above grade.
It would, they would have to reduce their floor area.
Right.
It's hard not to end up with nonconformities
And
when you're
it's-
changing the land use.
And
code.
when we do this, yeah. And if it were 100%, it's not just small numbers, it's big numbers, it's 1,000 square feet, it's a lot over.
So as a background, your floor area, the calculations for some of these hypotheticals weren't really the point of contention, like that you were having applications that were stretching plausibility and were too big floor area wise measurement. That's not at all been the
That is
concern.
not our problem at all. Most of these projects on the hillside that we see are way under the maximum floor area allowed.
It's just the,
Yeah.
Visuals.
So I don't expect you to read all this, but this kind of more clearly illustrates the point I'm making. On this project above, this one is on a 60% slope, so it is very steep. The maximum floor area for this site is 3,090 square feet. And under our current definition of basement, only 940 square feet of this house counts as floor area, which is crazy.
it doesn't, yeah, that doesn't.
However, if 100% below grade was a basement, this house would be at 4253, which is way over the maximum. Which it may be okay. And then here under the Telluride versus Aspen approaches, above grade floor area in Telluride is 940 square feet. With the Aspen model, it's 1571. It's
1.5.
still way below the maximum.
Yeah.
And then this one on Pandora is a interesting comparison because it's more above grade than most of them that we've been seeing. The maximum floor area on this lot is 2,300. Again, 50% or 75% below grade is a basement. Same thing, nothing changed.
Can I ask a question? So the effect of these smaller floor areas then is actually floor usable space of the house, let's put it that way, is for the applicant, for the builder is among other things that they pay a lot great less mitigation fee.
No, all of the floor area, livable floor area is counted towards mitigation.
All right, so what is the effect of having less floor area in terms of,
Getting through HARC.
Yeah.
And getting through the land use code.
so it's just a question of how big is the house for purposes of park review?
Yes, the size of the house determines the scale of park review.
Did you want to say something?
I'd just say on the whole, smaller houses above ground seems like sort of preferable from the HARC point of view. And not so much the issues is a question of how do you define basements on hillsides where all or nothing doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No,
Mhm.
it doesn't work. No, exactly. This example below was one of those that we found compared with the Aspen method, actually is more floor area. So again, but insignificant, 200 square feet. It doesn't seem to make any difference if you count actual above grade floor area or don't. I mean, it's bizarre, but just a couple of
And again,
examples.
what are we trying?
Yes.
What-
yeah.
what's
Exactly,
the
so to
drive?
get that,
For a problem, what's going on? What are we trying to solve?
Right.
So, this one was of more interest to HARC.
Yeah.
This project on the right is 5 stories. It's on the hillside. This has been approved. The one on the left is 4 stories above grade with 1 story below grade. It's not approved, but you will have different opinions about this than HARC did.
well, one is so much more upright and in your face
Mhm.
than the other that has quite a bit more of a setback. what's the lot width? Because it's not just a section, it's actually an elevation
Yes.
impact, which
But
means.
again, we're more concerned about basements, I think, right?
Yeah.
And Hark thought that one way to kind of limit mass and scale and limit below grade development is to limit the number of stories. And when they saw this example on the right last night, they decided it really does not matter because it is aligned with the topography of the site. It steps back appropriately. It's never gonna look more than 3 or 4 stories from the street, and they kind of stepped away from this approach, but I'm curious if this
What's
has
the-
any
well,
concerns.
What's the average frontage on these lots?
On the hillside lots, they're wider.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
So-
probably,
I think that combination
yes,
is the scale issue for me. If you
Yes.
have a narrow house that goes ding, ding, ding,
this one on the right is not very wide. The one on the left is very wide.
So again, like going back to where we started from, there are at least 3 points that we raised about this problem with digging deeply into the hillside. One is, although I completely agree with Peter that it's better to have less above grade, you're creating a huge concrete wall in the hill.
Yes, so.
And
is there
that could be a problem.
Is
for
there a
s- coup-
problem
For a couple
having
reasons.
4 stories below grade?
Well, it could be a problem for a couple of reasons. We've talked about hydrology, but
Yeah.
I think we should also consider construction impact. It's taken forever to build some of these things, and I'm sure the neighbors don't like it one bit. And the rest of town is also suffering. So, maybe there's a point at which we say, well, maybe there's some reasonable restrictions we can put on it based on those 2 rationales to start with. Those are my thoughts. Kathy and then Todd.
There's usually an above grade, either cubic foot allotment on the one or square foot allotment. And I think we should take that and then cut it in half, and that's the maximum you're allowed on the entire lot, but I don't necessarily want to see 2/3 above grade, but I don't want them to take a lot that's supposed to have, a 4,000 square foot house on it and get 8,000 feet with below grade or 10,000 square feet
Right.
with below grade. I think if they are supposed to have 4,000, they would get 6,000, and then it's up to them how much to put above grade and below grade, and Park guidelines might force them to put more of it below grade
Yeah.
because it looks better.
I jumped ahead to the last slide actually, because that is one of the other ideas is we combine all of the area. And then a percentage of that is allowed above grade. Does
Yeah,
that,
that's, that's what I would love to see. And I think it's important. I love having a garage. I have to go outside to get to it, but I can manage that still. But I think we want garages, we want oversized garages, so cars can actually get in there with the bicycles and the snowboards and the skis and all the boats and everything else that we have in our garages. So I love the idea that we have the garages, but they're kind of, not seen. So I don't think we want to really push everything to be above grade. I think the garage level is kind of essential, and that it's defined in such a way, 75%, 80% or whatever, where it's maybe all you have is the garage door and then and a man door, a human door, and then everything else is hidden away.
yeah,
And
and that's what
sure.
we're seeing.
So John, you didn't tell us what the effect of this one would be on projects that you've seen so far.
I have not calculated
Okay,
these.
I'm just curious because you talked about that previously.
Yeah, no, this idea kind of came up late, and I haven't been able to do any, run any numbers with group projects on that.
What's your instinct?
I don't know.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what
Derek?
about,
I-
what about the facade?
I think what we're
Oh, sure.
most concerned about is unintended consequences, and
Right.
as many of the architects have already admitted, whatever we do, is there,
We'll be chasing to get around it, or to
Oh, yeah.
find the way to manipulate it or push the thresholds where they serve.
yes,
So that's a given. And I think unintended consequence that certainly negative for Hark is more ends up above
More math,
ground. And that's challenge. I think there's so many different lot sizes and configurations that it's really tricky for me
Yeah.
to sort of speak to what's gonna work or.
Actually, we did go down this path a bit. We took kind of total area and as a ratio of lot size. And it works for kind of medium-sized lots, but it doesn't, our formula didn't work for large size lots or small lots.
When you say doesn't work, what does that mean?
The math doesn't work. It gets too big or too small. Right now in the other, not, in the zone districts that are not on the hillside, we have formulas that allow more floor area on smaller lots as a percentage and less as the lots get bigger. That isn't working on these hillside lots for some reason. And again, this is all advanced calculus to me. But for some mathematical reason, that way we were approaching it was not working. It doesn't mean we can't go back and revisit it or tweak it a bit. But again, we don't know what the unintended consequences are. I don't know.
So what have other jurisdictions done, if anything? We don't know.
Again, most other jurisdictions we've looked at consider basements as 100% below grade, which might work here on not steep slopes, on flatter slopes, but probably not on the hillside. Most other jurisdictions don't allow hillside development.
Exactly.
Yeah, Todd, sorry.
Yeah, well, having just spent 2 weeks in UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Yeah.
And
Right.
these are dating back
To the Romans or
before. The sensitivities that I'm feeling as we're talking about this are the total energy that we're putting into it, because that's the climate and how we're gonna manage that. And I don't have a methodology for that, but I think there's something in there. And then the other is it's what we call mass and scale and heart terminology. But it comes into how big does it look like? And these last ones that we're looking at, whether you look at it basement, not basement, whatever, it looks like a 5-story building, which is not Telluride scale. Telluride scale was historically 1- and 2-story building. And that's what people react to is, what does it look, what does it feel like? So if you're in Dubrovnik or in your Kotor, these buildings that they build out of stone and have earthquakes all this, they can't be more than 2 stories tall. Because if they are, they're not. The next earthquake that runs on. So they've got limits. And that's where my feeling is going on this is, you can go underground if you don't run over the building, the energy component of it, but you don't come more than 2 stories out of the ground. Maybe it's 3, but.
Well, this is interesting because I was just in Assisi, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we stayed in a building. It was very small, and it was very small above grade, and they had dug partly into the hillside in order to make it slightly bigger. And I asked the owner whether it was possible for them to make it bigger into the hillside, and she said no, because of the water. The water is coming down the hillside, and so the town rule is you can only put so much wall into the ground, if you will. And, it's like we have a not dissimilar situation here, I think.
Well, I think that what has blown all of the historic, medieval scale that, makes it those houses or those villages fit is concrete and engineering.
The Romans.
The
invented-
ability to do this, yes, they did. The ability to do this kind of thing and make it stand up is a modern technology, but doesn't mean that humans have changed scale. So that's the rub. So when you turn these 90 degrees and you look at them face on, that's a human scale to building scale ratio that we're uncomfortable with. So, and it's, it's not the skyscraper situation, it's looking at them in the context of our community, our geography. That I think is putting us in this very uncomfortable position and hard to define, because human scale is a little hard to define. What is tolerance? So,
Well,
Kathy.
and if you're looking at it from the road right in front, and you can only see 2 stories, is that okay? When you're on the gondola on the other side of the valley and it looks like,
yeah,
a Marriott?
right.
Kathy and then
I
Peter.
think clearly we're gonna have to divide this up differently. And I have built very steep, I've built on some very steep lots that were in the regular residential zone or historic residential zone, but maybe those are the exception. Those districts are handled one way, and clearly the transitional zone and the developing hillside 1 and 2 are handled totally differently. So I think we need to not try to find a universal solution. I think that's really important. And yeah, I think we do need to think about the gondola, when you're on the gondola, does it look huge or does it look like it's, a lighthouse with a big beam going out or something? It's not just, it's good. Maybe when you're on Main Street and you're in a canyon of buildings and you can't see the 3rd floors, that works. But when you're up on the hillside, and you're just a little bit away, you can see all 5 stories and that might not work. And so I think this is gonna take a lot more thought, but I like the idea of giving them a maximum square footage, that the bigger the lot, the smaller the percentage it is. And they put some of it above grade and some of it below grade, and Art goes, oh, go put more of it below grade or something. There's some way for them to have the power to say that. And it's just tough because everyone wants views and daylight and outdoor space, and we understand that. But then have it not look like some resort hotel, or, instead of just a single family home.
The analogy, if anybody watched the Kentucky Derby, you've seen what they've done to Churchill Downs.
Yeah. Didn't watch, but yeah.
Oh my God, talk about massive scale issues. There's this little tiny building now with the 2 spires,
Mhm.
and then these massive 5-6 story skyboxes that go 3 times on either side, it seems, of the actual original Churchill Downs, which is a colonial, spired quaint building, which I guess is now just the paddock area. I think that's the contrast. That's the elevation part of it that I think that we need to consider, not just the section part.
Well, we could also consider reducing the total amount of square footage allowed on these lots. If many jurisdictions don't allow building on this type of site at all, why are we allowing giant buildings out there? What is in town out there?
You don't restrict basements.
I think we need to start.
Is the
Yeah.
underlying question. It's not
Yeah.
a point of restriction. So,
So
I-
I'm hearing basements do need to be restricted, but for specific reasons. Ecological reasons, impacts to the neighborhood, the community.
And while we're all worried about then trained energy and all what goes into these massive concrete foundations, a house that's mostly buried like this should have a much lower heating and cooling footprint than the house that's.
It's sheltered,
Because
right?
it's earth sheltered, and even if they're not using heat pumps, this is just automatically going to have, some energy efficient by being so buried. So you know, there's some balancing there that for the next 30 years, it's gonna be efficient, even if the 2 years of foundation work is a nightmare.
Peter,
On the topic of the facades or the fenestration and the facade width was brought up, I think might have come up before.
Yeah,
Last
actually, I
night,
skipped
but
over that slide.
that piece, I wasn't tracking, previous, but
Yeah.
it speaks to the perception of the scale of it, and it's been, I think, referenced as having hotel feels in some instances, or just unbroken widths.
Mhm.
And Park has that with windows, and there's a lot of language in the guidelines in these zones to try to soften and reduce some of those challenges. It feels to me more guideline related, and it's not really part of the land use code. And I don't know if that's like, oh yeah, we can throw that under this umbrella. But seems better suited for park and guidelines. If you're talking about windows, sod widths.
This seems to be a dimensional requirement, or it could
you've
be
got
a
different lot
dimensional
sizes. I mean,
requirement,
these
though,
lot
that
widths are
maybe is,
all
the width
different.
is a percentage of the lot width, or it's, you know, it's
I
not.
think they need to
I
go
just think that
together.
you need a guideline that says we're gonna break these planes, whether they're guardrails or walls or vary and tuck it in.
Color, materials, whatever.
And they're in there, but it's,
So the guidelines on the hillside treatment areas are much less prescriptive than in town, in the historic district. They're quite lenient,
Flexible.
very flexible, yes.
So topography,
Like-
geometry,
Yes,
roof slopes.
windows, all of it are much less demanding.
Now we need to change them.
Well, that's what we were about to do before we were working on this code amendments.
yeah,
That's fortunate.
Well,
this
I didn't
might go
realize that.
back into the guidelines category.
I would also say, I think we are all focused on the North Hillside for good reason. There's a lot over there comparatively, but there's a steep lot I'm thinking of in the AC.
Mhm.
That's easily 25%.
Yeah.
and then we have the whole
So-
wind horse.
I don't know that,
Subdivision.
it could be broken down by zone district, it may just be percentage of slope.
Just
on the
pointed
left.
out, I think, if we figure this out for 25% or more on the north side, should work for the south as well.
Might be, yeah.
But don't you think that code amendments, followed by appropriate implementation through guidelines, I mean, those gotta go together.
Yes,
And so, and our overreaching goals for changes in land use, in the land use code, there's a trickle down effect. So, I don't have any problem having these kinds of architectural discussions, because the ramifications of what we approve is what Hark faces. I point to you because you've been on Hark, sorry. But, so, that the intent actually is implementable or in an understandable framework when it goes through the process.
we're really just now seeing applications on the hillside. We, up until, this last year, we just weren't getting them yet.
Right.
And so, it takes time
It's
to
the last frontier.
understand, yeah, it takes time to understand how the code actually looks in real life when it's built.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing now, because they are starting to be built and we're getting more applications. Those are the vacant lots, so.
So
but
hit pause and get our act together, then.
Well, that's,
Oh, I hope-
we don't get to hit pause for very long.
No, we
That's the
don't.
problem.
So Jonna, do you feel that we've provided you the guidance you need to do something,
I
make some
think you
choices here?
provided excellent feedback, yes, and we will reconvene and come up with some more specific ideas. We are also doing more research and on some other areas, running some numbers again on some of these other approaches that I mentioned. And I don't know what kind of information we might be able to provide as far as engineering or or hydrology by the next meeting, but I think we may need to find
Right.
someone who can help us with that.
Yeah.
I think
and
if
we-
you ask a structural engineer, they'll say, yeah, we can build that.
Yeah,
You know, that's a
Yeah,
problem.
they are building, they are building.
So,
know
right, so
know
we
they
need
can.
to broaden the,
Yes, Kathy.
I think the other issue that works into all of this is rockfall fences. And, when we have these long, narrow kind of hillside lots that look, look facing to the south. They've got to get that rockfall fence on their land and then fit the house below it, and I mean,
Right.
my neighbors and other people in my area have been trying to get the rockfall fences on town open space above Tomboy Road. And I think everybody needs to go in that eyes wide open. The first thing you design is your rockfall fence. And then the second thing you design is the house to fit around the rockfall fence and meet our zoning and our HART guidelines.
yes, and
And
that's,
because I think there was one project that came through that never allowed for its rockfall fence that I could see.
correct.
Yeah.
They have since figured it out,
Right.
but,
okay.
So Jonna, what is you put up a schedule at the beginning. Can you briefly run through that with us?
yes.
So we know kind of what's coming down the pike, what your plan is.
Looks like, someone has their hand up too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who has their hand up?
Tom Kennedy,
Oh, sure.
I've asked him to unmute.
Hi, you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, hi, Tom.
Hi, just wanted to say a couple words. So we spent some quality time together a couple of years back when we were doing the Windhorse subdivision, the Overlook subdivision. I'll think of it as Windhorse. And there were a lot of unique things that were involved in that. It was a PUD approval, and it was working through a master plan that had been adopted back in the late 1980s, 1989, resolving litigation that had been occurring on the hillside about development rights. The master plan was establishing areas that were developable and where access roads could be. And there was a lot of effort to try to really manage the development that was going to be occurring on the hillside. And when we brought our application in, we were sensitive to the master plan recommendations and requirements, as well as the HD2 zone requirements. Effectively, we ended up sliding the development down the hill as far as possible to align with Galena, which was one of the roads that had been called out in the master plan for access, and clustering the lots very considerably. The HD2 zone basically had a 10,000 square foot lot size, and in most of the lots, with the exception of one of them, we were under, and in some instances considerably under, that 10,000 square foot size so that we could cluster the lots. We had narrower lot frontages instead of the 50-foot requirements. They were generally ranging between 35 feet and 50 feet. We were pushing the front setbacks downwards so the homes could be closer to the street. We reduced the side yard setbacks, and the whole idea was to try to facilitate clustering in that one particular spot on the lower side of the hillside. The acreage that we had in the subdivision would have supported a density of 29 units. We platted 20. We did a considerable amount of open space. More than 50% of the project was open space that we platted as open space and conveyed to the town. There was another developable block that was in ownership by other parties, Block 2. That was also a development site. There was a lot of pressure for decades from the owners of those parcels to try to come in and develop their property. We ended up buying those folks out, making that open space and also conveying it to the town. So my point is, we did a lot of work to clean up that area of the hillside and establish a cluster development down below, and set forth expectations about the volume ratios, because the HD2 zone has a kind of the weird calculation of doing volumes as being how you measure the square footage of the homes. So I listened to Hark last night. I'm listening to the conversation that you had now. You've identified a number of good issues. I'm sure we'll be talking about them and listening and thinking about them. But I just want you to be mindful that with our PUD approval and all of the implementation that we've done and furtherance of that PUD approval, I just ask you to be careful about how you're reacting to whatever code amendments you're doing as they relate to this project because of the PUD approvals and the long history. So I don't have any specific comments about what your discussions were leading to, because you're just at the formative stage now. But I do ask you to pay attention and keep in mind the PUD. And I've met with Ron, and I'll continue to meet with Ron and Jonna now, so we can talk about what you're doing and making sure we understand how that may affect the Wind Horse. All's there.
Thank you,
Thank
Tom. John, do you have anything more for us? Oh, did somebody else want to speak,
I
Piper?
just have a question. I'm not sure if we're meeting on the June 7th or June 8th or 7th, but probably June 8th. I have to look at my calendar. Do you want to talk to us that night as well? I mean, I'm sure we would love a short meeting, but you know.
I
I
know.
think that's awfully soon, and I'm actually gonna be out of town next week, so, but I am happy to go back to the schedule if you wanna look at dates.
So we'll see.
So
you back
so
at
on the
meeting
8th, on the
in
8th of
June.
June.
Yeah, on the 8th, we're going to have Ron talk about section,
300.
question 300.
Yeah.
And we'll have the discussion about that. And I think that will be the sole purpose of that meeting, correct,
Yes.
Phil? We don't have any other matters that we need to bring up then?
No, we have the P&Z chair meeting scheduled for the morning of June 6th for one public hearing item. And then, yes, the June 8th, well, you guys will let me know tomorrow, but the June 8th will be in the evening for one work session that's on.
Okay, and we'll make sure that, we hope that works. So John, and then we'll hear from you at our regular June meeting again.
Yes, it'll be your June.
It's the fourth Thursday in June.
22nd.
Yeah.
No,
Yes?
yes,
It's the fourth Thursday in
it's
June.
right after
Yeah,
Hark. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I'll see you probably whether your next couple
Yeah,
of
and
meetings.
maybe based on Tom's comments, there's only 2 subdivisions in the most extreme hillside zone, the one that Wind Horse is newer and had a much more thorough review than the first subdivision north and east Telluride. So maybe a real focus for some of this is the transitional hillside, the other, you know, and some of the other areas where there's very steep lots,
Yes.
and there's never been any subdivisions or PUDs or any thought at all. It's just
Right.
the minor.
And they're
And
getting
this is
developed one
not
at a time.
specific to Wind Horse or, and
north and east,
we
yeah.
are aware of the PUD. I don't know if Kevin wants to say anything, but yes, we are quite aware of the PUD and the dimensional requirements that have been granted through that.
Well,
PUD.
actually, I have a question that I'm sure Kevin can answer, which is, doesn't the PUD control so that even if we were to pass a more restrictive zoning requirement that would make that building in that area more restrictive, the PUD would still govern? Or is that wrong?
So the PUD probably is, it would be limited to issues about the lot creation. But if the zone district standards changed and it wasn't specifically called out as, let's say, a setback restriction that was specific to the PUD, and that, I'm just giving a very simple
Mhm.
example, and that changed in the land use code, then no, the land use code gets to be flexible. I mean, the lot still exists, it's just now constrained in a greater fashion by whatever land use code changes are.
Right. So in other words, the PUD still is extant, it just doesn't cover this aspect.
If it was specific on that issue and it varied with what the zoning was, then I think you'd have a different argument.
Okay.
But if it's not covered by that, then it's not
Then
it's
the
not an
zoning-
element of vesting.
Yeah, no, the zoning fills in that
Yeah,
part, whatever the
that's right.
zoning is. Okay.
But am I wrong? I didn't think we picked up HD2 in the temporary suspension.
Yes, I think we did.
HD1 and 2
HD1.
and transitional.
Let's take a look at that. And I may just have that wrong in my head.
Yes, it is.
It is
Like,
both
It is.
HD1 and 2.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
In all of the, in number 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, all right, great. I just couldn't remember what was top of my head.
Because it's a residential zone district. But
Because there's not a lot that's left in HD2 now.
Right.
Mhm.
That's most of my point, yeah.
That's not in the PD.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
actually, it is the PD.
It might be. Is there, I think there's a parcel to the west.
There's a parcel, oh, I mean, it's above it stops like by my next door neighbor, it stops being HD2 and goes to HD1. And the one parcel that's not in a subdivision or a PUD is already developed. I mean, it could be, what I could think of as the Grant McCargo house. It's already developed, so it could change, but
Why did I have in my head? I thought the Brax, or what was the Brax, I don't know who owns it now. Property to the west of, course.
the boxes own it. And, I think Patsy cried at town council and it didn't become, that's the real story. So owner cried at town council and it wasn't, I
Works
think it
every-
left.
We,
so it's not in.
Oh, he finds
I
that.
don't think it's an HD.
I'll look again tonight.
And their intent, I mean, this is just the current owner, their intent is that it'd be their own private open space. They're not planning to come through the process very soon.
So, all right, thank you, Jana. I think that
Thank
thank
concludes.
you all for your generous
item.
amount of time you've spent on this tonight.
All right, so we do have agenda work session item number 3, the land use code amendments. And we have decided
Vote to
we
continue
would like
that.
to, do we have a motion to continue that to a later date?
I'll motion to continue item number
3.
6.3.
3.
Is that right?
Mhm.
3, we're under work section, land use code amendments. Or, sorry, question 302, date certain to be determined, we think June 8th, but.
No, just say to a later.
To a later date. All right.
Thank you, Angela. Do I have a
You're
second?
welcome.
I'll second.
Thank you, Peter. All in favor, raise your hand.
Rambling on,
Motion
sorry.
carries. The item 3 is continued. Is there any board and staff discussion on other matters? Staff? No, all right. It is 7:45, and this meeting is adjourned by unanimous consent.
Nice to have you, Kevin.
I'm here because I didn't mention it. Ally's not feeling